Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hundreds of thousands of people have joined protest marches around the world on this, the first full day of Donald Trump's presidency. The demonstrations are to highlight women's and minority rights, which protesters say are under threat from the new administration. Tens of thousands of people joined the rally in London and other cities across the UK, but the biggest event was in Washington. From there, James Cook reports.
Washington has a long history of public protest, but even judged by those standards, this march is massive. Hundreds of thousands of women and many men too poured into the Capitol to make their voices heard.
I came from Hawaii to be here today, and I'm here to represent all the people that can't be here.
I'm really glad there's a lot of people who are willing to come and stand up for these kinds of things, because I feel like it's important.
It's not that we hate Trump, but we hate what he stands for, you know, and bigotry and racism, we're not going to stand for that.
It gives me hope for our future. It was a really dark day when the election results came in, and seeing this turn out really gives me hope that we will move forward for the better.
It is clear from the scale of this march that President Trump faces an enormous, perhaps impossible challenge, convincing these women and many more like them around the country that he governs for all America. He'll need more than prayer to unite the nation, but Mr. Trump and Vice President Mike Pence started their first full day in office at church with their families. But the new president shows no sign of compromising with his opponents, as his choice of music at this inaugural ball hinted. Even as they danced, plans to repeal President Obama's healthcare plan were already underway.
We want to see great things happen for our country. We want to make America great again, and we will.
Politicians around the world are now adjusting to the new era. Britain's Foreign Secretary gave his reaction in Myanmar.
Our new president has made it very clear that he wants to put Britain at the front of the line for a new trade deal. Obviously that's extremely exciting and important.
But Germany's leader had what sounded like a coded warning for President Trump.
I
believe it's best if we work together based on rules, common values and joint actions in international economics, international trade and military alliances.
There was less subtlety on the streets. These were the scenes in London at an anti-Trump demonstration. They were reflected here in the Kenyan capital Nairobi, in the Australian city of Sydney and in many other places. The elevation of a controversial populist to the most powerful office in the West has shaken the entire world.
Well, James Cook reporting, and he's in Washington for us now. So how are the protests being reported and likely to be received there then, James?
Well, I think it's difficult to ignore the scale of the opposition to the new president, Donald Trump, not only here in Washington, D.C., as we saw there around the world, but across the United States too. More than 600 marches are planned today. In fact, they're even marching against him, or at least demonstrating against him, as far away as a research station in Antarctica. Now, what Mr. Trump would say, what the White House would say, is that his supporters are in great number too, and that many of them perhaps do not travel to the likes of Washington, D.C., the swamp he has said he wants to drain, not least because sometimes, according to his side, they are the poorer members of society for whom he says he will stick up. Nonetheless, it's become a cliche to say it, but this country is incredibly divided. As for Mr. Trump himself, this afternoon we expect him to go to meet at the CIA. That will be a potentially very interesting meeting, possibly fraught given his conflict with the intelligence services during the latter stages of the election campaign and following his election, with their assessment that Russia had attempted to interfere in the US election on his behalf. But clearly the wheels of government are going into motion, and he's now in charge.
Indeed. James, thank you very much.
President Trump told supporters at one of his inauguration parties early this morning that there are no games. Now the work begins. And today, his first full day in the office, he was as good as his word and began fulfilling one of his big election pledges, dismantling Obamacare, his predecessor's flagship medical policy. But as he did, a mass protest against him filled the streets of Washington. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
After the setback, the fight back. A broad anti-Trump coalition of protesters are currently on the streets of Washington. Hundreds of thousands of activists have descended on the Capitol. Just 24 hours ago, this was the territory of Trump loyalists, celebrating the inauguration. Now those who fear he will launch an assault on women's rights are making their voice heard. Washington is now a different city. A new administration is in charge with a radically different, and for the establishment, disruptive agenda. At the inaugural balls last night, Donald Trump and the new First Lady Melania took to the dance floor. He is both exulting in his unlikely victory and still talking in the language of his campaign.
We've been pushed around by a lot of different people. Lots of bad things are happening. But I think you're going to see a big improvement, really.
Already the reversal of the Obama years is underway.
Next is an executive order minimizing the economic burden of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
Last night he signed a bill beginning to unravel health care reforms, which many Democrats regard as their greatest achievement.
I, James Norman Mattis.
And America has a new defense secretary. Trump's favorite general, Mad Dog Mattis, as the president calls him, is now in charge of an American military that is still at war in Afghanistan and against ISIS. This morning, President Trump was at the National Cathedral, attending with his family a church service in which different faiths offered their prayers for the new administration. But as Americans prepare themselves for a divisive presidency, activists, not only in Washington but around the country, are warning they will seek to resist his policies. This is the scene in Obama's home city of Chicago. Next week, President Trump is promising many more executive orders, taking America in an entirely different political direction. And Theresa May is likely to be here, the first foreign leader into the Trump White House. She may have significant challenges dealing with him, given his America First agenda that is both protectionist and deeply skeptical of NATO. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Women around the world have also been demonstrating against President Trump. Thousands of Australians protested against him in the centre of Sydney. Almost 1,000 members of women's rights groups and anti-Trump supporters demonstrated at the iconic Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And here, organisers say 80,000 people turned out for a march through central London, which ended at Trafalgar Square. But as Robert Moore reported, the biggest rally by far is in Washington. Penny Marshall is there. Penny, what do they hope to achieve?
Well, I think what they hope to achieve, and there are thousands of women and men descending now on the Capitol, what they hope to achieve is to claim this city back from Donald Trump. And yesterday, this city belonged to him and his Republican supporters from Middle America. Well, today it's the chance of the liberals from the eastern seaboard, a lot of people here also from California, to say what matters to them, what they feel is sacred to them in some ways. The civil rights that they fought for are under threat.
Our country and our people have been through much worse. It's just our time to step up and do something about it.
We're not okay with anything that with what he's doing, and we're not going to be okay with it, and he should know that.
I'm trying to be optimistic, wait and see, but I'm not liking what I'm seeing already.
We're not going to roll over and take whatever policies that are detrimental for women and for the planet generally.
Well, there's a myriad of reasons that people are here. I have to say a lot of them are here because of what they think is going to be the assault on women's rights and pro-choice. So a lot of women driven by that. But the overriding sense here is a loathing, a real loathing for Donald Trump. As I say, Middle America may like what he's doing for jobs and security, but the priorities of liberal America are the civil rights that they feel now are under threat. So what I'm seeing really is two Americas with two competing priorities.
Penny Marshall in Washington, thank you.
In every state, in every major American city, in Washington in particular, and across the world, women protest on an unprecedented scale. So at least 500,000 people have descended on Washington to protest against the Trump presidency, far above the numbers who attended his inauguration yesterday. They're calling it the Women's March, but there is a demonstration of support for all aspects of human rights, as well as a cry of anger against the president's more misogynistic comments. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is with me. Kylie.
John, well, the organisers wanted an act of mass political dissent, and they have that, and they have it in massive, extraordinary numbers. I've just been down among the protesters. There's a lot of energy there. This is a gendered protest, make no mistake. There are men and children, but the women are leading this march, many of them in pink hats. More on that in a moment. But this is about Donald Trump's attitudes toward women, his misogynistic comments, his bragging about sexual abuse, things that really threatened to derail him before the election did not, but the women are saying their piece today. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is still moving through the steps associated with the ritual of becoming president, but the key focus, at least in the centre of Washington, D.C. today, is on these protests.
Our dignity, our character, our rights have all been under attack.
We are an inspiring, spectacular, fierce force for change.
We stand tall and we stand strong.
A wave of protesters, many in pink knitted pussy hats, gathered in the National Mall where yesterday noticeably smaller crowds celebrated Donald Trump's inauguration. The Women's March, the culmination of a campaign begun on election night when in Hawaii, an outraged grandmother sent a 5-word Facebook post, "I think we should march." And so they did.
We refuse to give up because we have hope, because resistance is going to take back our country from white male supremacy and misogyny, racism.
I want her to know that that she matters as much as anybody else.
The LaFleur family travelled with their daughter across the country from Utah to be at the march.
Really believed that we were moving toward a world where there was equality. And I guess I was really disappointed that the election showed that maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a backlash. I don't know. I don't know if the future I thought was there is going to be there, but I guess being here with all these people makes me feel hopeful.
It's a comforting show of strength for many, but the more people showed up, the more you had to wonder.
If so many people were opposed to Donald Trump, how did he win the election?
People have felt secure with Barack Obama. People underestimated Donald Trump. And, you know, if we had as many people wanting to get out the vote and be as active as they are today, you know, we would have won.
So tell me about this hat. It is spectacular.
It's a pussy hat. Isn't it adorable?
And tell me the relevance of the pussy hat.
So there was a word used by a certain person named Donald J. Trump, so we decided we'd claim it.
While women reclaimed hallowed ground on the National Mall, the new president, accompanied by the First Family, attended a church service at the National Cathedral. If Donald Trump looks a little weary, well, there were early morning tweets about great reviews for his hardline inaugural address. And the night before, he'd attended the presidential ball and danced with his wife, Melania.
General Mattis was just approved by the Senate. First one.
Donald Trump signed off on the nation's new defense secretary and had signed an executive order signaling his intention to undo the Affordable Care Act, a first-day flourish from the self-declared man of action. But for every action, there is a reaction. And today has proven that with every step President Trump takes,
These boots are made for walking.
There are millions ready to resist.
Well, now, the rallies alone have become so large that many of the cities are having to forbid any march because the numbers are too great. It's just happened here. They've just announced that the people here will not be allowed to move from where they are now having the rally and therefore won't go down to... But let us go now to Chicago, let's take a look at Chicago, which is vast. There are huge crowds, and exactly the same things happen there.
Exactly. They had such a big turnout early on that they couldn't stick to their original plans, so their rally was moved from one part of the city to another, and now it's simply such a crush that it's not safe for them to march through the streets as they'd intended to. Not only Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, New York, and I think what we're seeing are indications that there will be strongholds of resistance to Donald Trump's government, and these cities are giving us a glimpse of how that will play. When he moves against Obamacare, when he appoints a Supreme Court justice, are we going to see that at every step?
Well, now let's cut to our camera here on the roof, where I think we can pick up beyond the trees over here. Take a look over here. Can you get through to the trees on this camera? Now, you can't see much there because we're about three-quarters of a mile away from it, but what is so incredible is you can actually hear the sound, the enormous sound of people cheering and cheering the speakers and the rest of it. Now, you've just spotted somebody in the crowd.
I haven't seen him myself, but I understand that John Kerry, it's such a big crowd, it's hard to know who's there, but John Kerry, former Secretary of State, is apparently marching, which is extraordinary. I mean, the Obama administration is not going quietly. They are going to stay and fight. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, who can probably hear a lot of this, is meant to be going to the CIA today, already trying to build bridges, as he needs to, with the intelligence community, given the spat that he's had with them recently. So if he ever doubted the scale of the job at hand for him, it's very clear today.
Well, one of the questions, I suppose, is, I mean, there's no way he's going to be affected by any of these. He's not going to suddenly say, I want to reach out to women. I mean, yesterday's inauguration speech had absolutely no reaching out.
No, it wasn't an inclusive speech by any means, no.
Well, now, before the rally began, I caught up with one of the high-profile participants in today's march here in Washington, the actor Patricia Arquette, and I suggested marching was all very well, but there are 4 years of Donald Trump to come.
If we're not careful, we'll have 8 years of Donald Trump, so we have to get very active.
And how do you get active? I mean, what are you going to do? You can march, but what can you actually do?
Well, you can march. I think all of these groups are going to align together. This is spontaneous. This is actually like coming from the people. This is the people's will. People have spent great amounts of money to come to Washington, D.C., to travel across the country to have their voices heard.
You're a hugely regarded actress. Do you think this will have a personal cost for you?
Perhaps, but it doesn't matter at a certain point. I mean, if you're really going to be that cowardly to protect your own opportunities at the expense of your fellow human beings and them being at risk of losing their civil rights, then what kind of person are you, really, at the end of the day? You can't take your money with you when you die, and it's about helping each other in this lifetime.
Well, America's never seen anything like it on this scale in terms of a women's protest. There's been solidarity marches too across the world, including in Britain. So let's go over to Christian in London for that and the rest of the day's news. Christian.
Thanks, John. Well, Manchester, Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast all saw their own protest marches, but the biggest event was here in London, where tens of thousands of women and a lot of men took to the streets. Fatima Manji went along.
Steps of solidarity with their American sisters. Tens of thousands joined the march in London, proclaiming their rejection of Mr. Trump and the politics of hate they say he represents. Some placards more explicit than others.
Is this about Donald Trump, or is this something else now?
I think it's bigger than that, but I think he's really actually shone a light on the urgency that these kind of marches should be taken really seriously. And actually, him as somebody we can hold up and point at and say he's part of this massive problem actually shines light on the whole thing.
It's their future. They're going to learn that doing this means a lot to respecting women.
It's the first march I've done, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I've not been on a march before, and I felt I have to stand with everybody else and just say, can we all stop this now, please?
It was a scene replicated in other UK cities and around the world. Many said the act of marching itself made them feel less powerless. Some see it as a first step in a fight back. Others call for conversation.
Go out and meet the people you think are a problem for you, and talk to them, and you'll find out you've got more in common than you've got differences.
But most of the people here are sort of anti-Trump liberals, aren't they?
Oh God, yes. This is a liberal loving this kind of thing. I mean, you can't get a babysitter in North London.
Some activists say it's also about demanding fairness for women in Brexit Britain and changing attitudes towards migrants.
But here's the problem. 53% of white women voted for Trump. Lots of women in this country backed Brexit. So you're not taking all women on this journey, are you?
I can see, obviously, I can see the women who aren't here, if you like. But I think what we've got to do in a democracy is to be able to hear everybody's voices. And we have to tell a compelling story about equality.
The 80,000 or so who marched the streets of London today may agree. But how will they convince others?
I've been getting away with it all my